Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is still in Boston. I'll be talking to him later tonight, which will be Wednesday night if you're listening to this after the fact, about Gregg Berhalter's latest U.S. men's national team roster. For now, I'm going to be joined by Matt Doyle of MLS soccer fame. He wrote a great piece about the team focusing on the arrival of young players, so you should definitely check that out. In this show, we talked about the roster, the U.S. Open Cup, the MLS playoff race, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Definitely an enjoyable time and an enjoyable conversation. Before I get to that, a little bit of info about the roster itself. Berhalter called up 26 players for the USA's upcoming friendlies with Mexico and Uruguay. Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore, Omar Gonzalez were left off so that they could play for Toronto because they have MLS games over the international break because Major League Soccer. DeAndre Yedlin, Matt Miazga, Tim Weah, DeAndre Yedlin, Dwayne Holmes, all missing due to various degrees of injury, and according to a report by Paul Tenorio for The Athletic, Darlington Nagbe turned down a chance to play for the team, reportedly did the same thing for the Gold Cup. So that's where things stand there. Here's the roster as it currently exists. 4 goalkeepers called up, Jesse Gonzalez of FC Dallas, Brad Guzan, Atlanta United, Sean Johnson, NYCFC, and Zach Steffen of Fortuna Dusseldorf. In terms of defenders, we've got John Brooks, Reggie Cannon, Sergino Dest. Everybody breathe a sigh of relief there. Nick Lima, Aaron Long, Daniel Lovitz, Tim Ream, Miles Robinson, and Walker Zimmerman. So, about what we expected given the lengthy list of injuries. In midfield, Sebastian Lletget, Weston McKennie, Alfredo Morales. He returns. Also of Fortuna Dusseldorf, I should add. Paxton Pomykal, Christian Roldan, Will Trapp, and Jackson Ewell. And then, interestingly, when we get to our forwards, Christian Pulisic listed as a forward alongside Corey Baird, Tyler Boyd, Jordan Morris, Josh Sargent, and Giassi Zardes. So, 26 players in there. We'll see if any get added or any get dropped. But right now, that's where things stand. And right now, with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to me talking to Matt Doyle. With me now, I've got my friend and yours, Mr. Matthew Doyle. Hi, Matt. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about all things U.S. soccer today.
Oh, it is always my genuine pleasure to talk to you.
See, it started off genuine, and then it went sarcastic, and now I don't know what to think anymore.
That's just my voice. I really can't help it.
See, again, it sounds like you're rolling your eyes even as you say that. But I mean it sincerely when I say we're going to talk all things U.S. soccer, because we're going U.S. national team. We're going to talk a little U.S. Open Cup. We're going to talk Major League Soccer. I feel like we're rounding it out well. Apologies to USL and NISA and all those things. But everything else we'll get to today if that works for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
But first, I want to talk to you about your dietary preferences, because in Orlando, we caught up with you. We had tacos. It was very good. But you seem to find one of the best restaurants in Orlando fairly quickly, and that is saying something. Is that a thing you do whenever you travel? Do you go out and actively look for like the good local food, or do you just sort of know the style of cuisine you like and look for that?
Oh, I go out and I look for the good local food.
All right.
That is always my thing when I travel, and I'm embarrassed by the fact that I'm still mostly a monoglot. You know, I have a little bit of Spanish, and I'm working at getting more. But it's hard to, and most of my travel outside of the U.S. or into inner cities in the U.S., it tends to be towards the Spanish-speaking enclaves. And I want to experience that culture, and I can't quite do it, via conversation just yet. But you can sure do it with food. So wherever I go, and I do this on vacation too, our favorite thing to do, me and my wife, is we go to a city and we do a walking food tour of the city. And it is the absolute best way to experience a new place.
All right, I'm down for that. I do agree with you, because food and soccer were the two things I learned to talk about fastest in Turkish in Turkey. So yeah, I think if you keep it up with the food, I think you've got the soccer market covered. So you should be good to go. And with that in mind, I wanted to talk to you about the U.S. roster. Let's start there. A few key points. No Timothy Weah, Adams, Yedlin, I believe all due to injury. Paul Arriola withdrew. Nagbe maybe did the same. Gregg Berhalter was a little bit dodgy on that one today. I'm wondering, first off, if there were any names you thought might be included that weren't, or if there were any names that made you very excited that they were included.
Well, we'll answer the first part first.
Sure.
those guys that you mentioned for injuries, I mean, Adams and Weah are the two that I would really have loved to see with this group, but we'll get to them hopefully next month. And then it's Yedlin, Miazga, and Dwayne Holmes.
Yeah.
Miazga just got injured last week. Yedlin, long-term recovery, it looks like, and Dwayne Holmes is just coming back to health. And I guess he played for Derby County this weekend and was terrible. So I would have, if those guys had been healthy, I would have liked to have seen all of them, but like they're friendlies, it's not a big deal at all. As for the players who weren't called in that I would like to see, like there's a number of them, like young forwards especially, who have MLS games that weekend. Like I don't think Jeremy Abobasi's ready yet, but I would rather see him for these games than another round of Chassis Artis. Mason Toy is kind of the same thing. And then I guess, I guess it leads us to like my only disappointment is like, look, Jossie's done well for the Crew recently, but we know what he brings to the national team. And even though guys like Sebastian Soto and Bobby Wood aren't really playing a lot right now in the two Bundesliga, like, there's going to be a time in the next couple of years when one or both of those guys are necessary for the U.S. national team. So why not start that process now? Why not bring those guys now? So that's like one of my only two areas of like just minor frustration. Mm-hmm. The other one being, I feel the same way about Brandon Cervania. Like we've seen Will Trapp almost 20 times for the national team now. We know he's been capable of having some half decent performances, but by and large, not. Cervania is not an elite U20 prospect. He's not a guy who's at the same level as Pomacall and Dest or Weah or Sargent. But he's been really, really good with FC Dallas over the past 4 months or 3 months since the U20 tournament. And he plays a position of need and he plays it well. So I think there's an argument for one of Sebastian Soto or Bobby Wood and for Brandon Cervania over Will Trapp. But by and large, this roster has way more guys I'm excited to see than ones I'm disappointed about seeing.
That makes sense to me. Where is Corey Baird on that list? Because he is one who I will honestly say I'm not as familiar with. I'm guessing you definitely are more so. So for folks like me, like what is he bringing to this national team, and how well do you expect him to perform in these friendlies?
I think he's probably the fourth string winger on this team, and he's Paul Arriola-ish in his energy and his speed. And kind of in his touch as well at times. I think he's a little bit better in the attacking third, and he's had kind of a tough season with RSL, but over the last 6 weeks, especially under Freddie Juarez, he's taken a step forward. That said, I mean, Pulisic, Boyd, and Morris on this roster are probably or definitely ahead of Corey Baird. And then once the next generation of wingers gets added in, I think he'll have to fight for any sort of long-term relevance. But I mean, that's what we want. Mm-hmm. We want guys to get, pushed, and maybe he's able to push back and take his game to another level and show that he actually can do the job. Worth noting as well, he does play a lot of center forward for RSL, but he plays it like he's not at all a back to the goal player. Like he just runs off the back shoulder, and he tends to make runs between the center back and the fullback rather than like pure center forward runs where you're splitting the central defenders. I don't think we'll see him in that spot, but if Berhalter wants to try a kind of a janky new look, that's something at least.
Similarly, like, do you think there's a chance, Dale and I talked about this a little bit, about like the possibility of Jordan Morris going back to playing as more of like a central striker for the national team? Do you think that's something we might see from him, or do you expect to see him consistently used as a winger?
I think he's a winger now. Okay. It's, there is maybe a break glass in case of emergency situation where he could be a center forward. But I don't think this is it. I think and I hope that the purpose of these friendlies is to get Josh Sargent at least 140, 150 minutes at center forward against very good teams.
You wrote a nice piece for MLS Soccer about this roster. You kind of broke it down, talking about the younger generation coming through. One of the things that you pointed out in there was that Pulisic listed as a forward, not a midfielder. So, and I think he is in your list of wingers that you gave us briefly earlier. Is that where you do expect him to play? Berhalter in the press conference was a little bit evasive on that one, said well, he can be a 10, but he can still play wide, and he can play wide and still be a number 10. So not a lot of clarity there. Are you sticking with maybe we see Pulisic as a winger in these friendlies?
Yeah, I think so. If you just look at I think there's 7 central midfielders listed, and there's only, if you count Pulisic as a winger, there's still only 4 wingers. So just the numbers game tends to suggest that we're going to see him in what I think is his natural position, which is out on the wing. And he's played both. I think for Chelsea so far, he's played a little bit more on the left. Mm-hmm. But over the bulk of his career, he's probably played more on the right. I'd be happy to see him in either spot, but what I'd be really happy to see is him at left wing, and then Paxton Pomykal as that left-sided number 10, who can, because if you remember back to the Gold Cup, when it was Pulisic as the 10 and Areola as the left wing, they would swap and interchange all the time. Like Pulisic would be inside and Areola would be outside, even though their starting points were opposite all the time. And Pomykal does that naturally. He's left-footed, and he's actually kind of a better creator when he flares out wide than when he's sitting central. And we know that Pulisic loves to make those diving runs coming off the wing. So what I want to see, I mean, maybe more than anything in this camp, is how those two guys combine and whether they can sort of immediately get on the same page.
So that's a big one then that you're going to be looking for. What else will you be looking for coming out of these friendlies? Is it particular players? Is it patterns of play? Is it something else entirely?
I want to see how much of the system, and we all know that the system is in quotes now and has a little trademark after it. I want to see how much of the system the U.S. holds on to. Now that he's had 6 months with it and a dozen games and all of that. One of the interesting things to think about is that Dest and Lima are both right-footed left backs for their clubs. And you could take that hybrid role with the right back coming inside and playing as a D-mid. Well, you could take that and just transpose it to the other side. And both Lima and Dest especially, because he's basically an offensive player, would love to come inside and be like ad hoc central midfielders, and then just have the right back be a little bit more traditional and a little bit more, I don't want to say stay at home, but recognizable as a traditional fullback. So I'm interested to see if that's the way that Sergiño Dest in particular gets used. Really interested to see how Josh Sargent does on both sides of the ball, because he was kind of lost defensively against Jamaica, and there were questions about his fitness. And then, I mean, I thought that against Mexico in the final, we didn't do a good job of getting pressure to the ball in the right spots in central midfield, especially minutes like 50 through 75. Mm-hmm. They overran us. And look, it was a learning experience for Weston McKennie, and it was a learning experience for the other guys out there. I want to see if we have some sort of answer from that, or for that comes systemically, and that comes from individual improvement in terms of recognition and role.
Pardon the interruption, my dear friends. We'll get back to the chat with Matt Doyle momentarily, but I did want to let you know that today's episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by 4hims.com, a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, and sexual wellness for men. Our friends over at Hims, a new wellness brand for men, would like to remind you that though summertime is here, you shouldn't feel obligated to wear a baseball hat unless you absolutely want to. If you want to wear the hat, wear that hat. But if you're wearing that hat to maybe cover up a bald spot or some thinning hair, hair, you may not have to do that anymore. Because first of all, it's worth noting that it's far more common for people to be dealing with hair loss issues than we might expect. 66% of men lose their hair by the age of 35. But you don't have to sweat that. You can sweat the hot temperatures. They've returned to Richmond. It's getting hot again. I'm assuming that's the case elsewhere. But you certainly don't have to sweat losing your hair, because Hims will connect you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. They offer well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescriptions to help you keep your hair. And best of all, it makes it really easy. There's no waiting room. There's no awkward in-person doctor visits. So you can save hours by going to forhims.com. So if you're a Major League Soccer player who's maybe getting up there in years and you've got a busy travel schedule ahead of you as we get to the close of the season, maybe you're a U.S. national team player and you don't feel like wearing a baseball cap, you don't feel like shaving your head anymore, but you don't have time to go visit a doctor and take time away from training and all that stuff. Instead, you can go to forhims.com and they will connect you with medical-grade solutions so you can deal with the problem, and they will send them right to your door. So you don't even have to go out to get them. It's all very, very easy. Our listeners can get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now, while supplies last. You can see the website for full details and safety information, but this would cost hundreds if you went to a doctor or a pharmacy. But if you go to forhims.com/totalsoccer, that's forhims.com/totalsoccer, then you can get their trial month for just $5. One more time, forhims.com/totalsoccer. Thank you very much to Hims for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to Matt Doyle. My final question for you about the national team is more about the conflict between the national team and Major League Soccer. Berhalter spoke a little bit about his frustration that MLS continues to operate during this window. So, as an example, that's why he cited Bradley, Josie, and Omar Gonzalez won't be there, because he wanted to leave them with Toronto. Do you share that frustration? Even from a workload standpoint, are you focusing on Major League Soccer and U.S. national team games at the same time? Would you like to see MLS sort of observe that break, even if it means you have to work more midweek for some midweek fixtures?
Of course. It's my big gripe with the schedule this year. I think that compressing it by a month, we lost the opportunity to actually observe all of these international breaks, and it's really frustrating. And granted, these are just friendlies, but still, friendlies matter, and we're only a year from the start of World Cup qualifying. So I would much rather have seen, the full squad here, and MLS taking the full week off.
So one player who is included, Miles Robinson, also is now a U.S. Open Cup winner, with Atlanta winning 2-1 last night. It felt for a moment like it was not going to be as close of a game as it ended up being. Atlanta jumping out to a 2-0 lead inside of 16 minutes. Minnesota pulled one back, but Atlanta finished with the U.S. Open Cup. Matt, what were your takeaways from that game, and did it end up being more enjoyable than you thought it would be in those first 15?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be, once the first 15 were done, I thought it was going to end up 5-0.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, part of it was Atlanta sort of easing off the throttle, because I think they probably thought it was all done and dusted at that point. And part of it was you got to give a lot of credit to Minnesota United for the way they came out in the second half, because they didn't think it was over. If Michael Boxall doesn't miss from 2 yards, in second half stoppage time, it wouldn't have been over. They would have sent it to extra time. It was a lot of fun, and it showed a lot of the good stuff that Miles Robinson has been able to add to his game, and the stuff that I think he kind of already had in terms of his ability to blow up counterattacks. I think he's going to end up being a really good addition to the U.S. national team.
I have some concerns about his long-range passing and his ability to kind of be on the ball the way I think Gregg Berhalter wants. Some people have not agreed. Most of them have Atlanta United avatars. What do you make of Miles Robinson's passing ability?
I think it's improved by leaps and bounds year over year. And he's not going to hit those Matt Beasler 50-yard switches on a dime, but he does a lot of breaking the lines with his passing now, which is something that I don't think anybody really expected. And it's he's not playing through balls, but the forward, or the way Atlanta plays, it's a 3-4-2-1. So it's always one of Pete or Barco checking into the half space. Miles Robinson has gotten really good at playing to those guys like right to their feet, right as they check into the half space. It's rehearsed. It's very clearly rehearsed. He knows what he's looking for. But the fact that he's executing it at a high level, it speaks well to his ability to improve. And that's a skill set all on its own. The ability to continue to add to your game is something that not every player has. And Robinson, as I said, he's shown it at a high level. I mean, he ripped Club America up with his passing, which is like, okay, like people are just missing the Campeones Cup. I disagree with that, but whatever. Like if you watch that game, Club America was going out there trying to win that game, and Robinson was constantly able to sort of evade the first line of their pressure with the ball on his foot, and then hit like a very good pass to get Atlanta into a position where they had numerical superiority.
So I'm kind of conflicted by Atlanta. So I'm going to just kind of verbalize that, and I'm going to let you respond. But basically, I have a hard time understanding them this season because first season they make the playoffs. That's very good for an expansion team. We'll talk more about expansion teams in a sec. Then winning MLS Cup. Now they've won US Open Cup. And yet it feels like if they don't have a very strong run, if not make it to MLS Cup again, then the season is unsuccessful. And I feel like that comes down to Frank de Boer and the sort of I almost equate him with Maurizio Sarri at Chelsea, that even when they're performing well, it still feels like Atlanta fans are a couple bad games away from going right back to being really frustrated with him. But I can't tell if that's just sort of me letting social media color the way I see things. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think people have bought into Frank de Boer a little bit more? Do you think he is more of a stable figure for Atlanta United and their fans?
I think so. Certainly more than a month ago. But he's not yet at the level where Tata was in that fan base's eyes.
Do you think anyone ever will be? I feel like Tata Martino will be forever this immortal, untouchable figure.
I mean, you might be right, because that team, when they came in, they played beautiful soccer, winning soccer over 2 years, and they finished it by hoisting the trophy that they most wanted to hoist. It's tough to match that, and so far De Boer hasn't. But I'll tell you what. His team's already shown they could beat Mexican teams. They beat Monterrey in the CCL, and they beat Club America and Campeones Cup. And if he does that again this coming spring, because now they are officially in CCL again, maybe he will pass Tata. But just from a neutral perspective, in general, his team has not been anywhere near as much fun to watch. They've figured some of that out, and I think it's maybe him loosening the reins a little bit. Some of it is just bizarrely the fact that Justin Miram, it turns out, is an amazing left wing back who can play end line to end line, which is nobody saw that coming. And some of it might just be that these guys actually are champions, and they had 6 months of frustration, and they said, okay, well, it's not going to change, so let's get down to it, and let's play the type of soccer that we're capable of playing.
And how many games, official competitions against Mexican teams, do you have to win before you're automatically named U.S. national team manager?
I don't know, but it's actually a good question to ponder going forward. And I bet Bob Bradley, for one, will have a take on that next winter in the run-up to CCL. So.
Yeah, that checks out. I mentioned expansion teams. We're going to go to the opposite side of the table here because it has been a rough season for FC Cincinnati and their fans. And that seems like it's kind of generally the case when it comes to expansion franchises. For every Atlanta or Portland, there are many other examples of teams that struggle and do so kind of consistently. Why do you think that is? I know it's kind of an obvious question of they're starting off, but delving a little bit deeper, it seems like if you're trying to make a splash, you're trying to hit the ground running, you want to be as strong as you possibly can be, and yet it genuinely seems like some franchises take the opposite approach of we'll figure it out at some point, it'll be fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange, and I know that some teams kind of bristle at the idea of a soft launch. Minnesota United in particular, but that's kind of what they did. They said, all right, let's see what we can build in year 1 and year 2, and then year 3 is when we're really going to be ready to go all in, because we'll have, figured out what works and what doesn't. And be able to sort of adjust and tweak and change and improve along the way. I get it because you don't want to set expectations too high. And I also get it because if you go out and you spend the way Atlanta spent on imports, and you get it wrong, then look, not every ownership group can afford or will afford, choose to afford, to buy out a player like Andre Horta or to sell him back at a significant loss. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's the difference. But I think the bigger way it's a difference is that, like, Tata Martino is one of the best coaches who's ever coached in MLS. And if you look at his background, with Paraguay, with, in the Argentinian league and with Argentina, I thought Argentina, like, I've watched Argentine soccer really close for 25, 30 years. I thought the couple of years that they had under Tata was the best they've played since the 90s. And like, he's a really great coach. And Bob Bradley is a really great coach. And I think that the difference in terms of those two guys and the other coaches that we've seen come in at the head of expansion teams is pretty significant. And I think that, especially because in this era where coaching matters so much, that more than anything else is a differentiator.
Hey everybody, this is Taylor jumping in for one quick second. Much more still to come from Matt Doyle, but first I wanted to let you know that today's episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by our friends over at Roughneck Scarves. That's roughneckscarves.com, RUFFNECK scarves.com. You know them, you should love them because they've been one of our longest sponsors and because they are the makers of the high quality, very nice scarves. They're the official scarf provider for US Soccer, Major League Soccer, the NCAA, and the USL. They do also have the custom scarf option where you can design your own, which is what I want to talk about today, because I asked on Twitter, basically, if you were to design a custom roughneck scarf to represent this current iteration of the U.S. men's national team, this current roster, what would be on it? We had a lot of answers. They're all in kind of one of two camps. The first one comes from No One O Consequence on Twitter. A picture of Morris and Zardes both chasing a terrible first touch, with Sargent in a warm-up jersey in the background on one side, and me crying on the other. So yeah, that's one perspective. Our friends over at the High Press Pod suggested a bunch of baby emojis to represent all the young talent being called up on one side, and a picture of Old Yeller getting taken out back to represent the U.S. men's national team ushering out the old guard, Josie, Bradley, Wando, etc. Hopefully not with that level of finality, but a good suggestion. Lily says Sergino Dest, that is all. Similarly, the MLS Aces podcast suggests Frankie de Jong handing Sergino Dest a torch, and that is all. I'm not sure what to make of either one of those, although I like them both because they feature Sergino Dest, and that's enough to make me happy. David Morales says the promise and hope brought about by Sargent overlooked by the looming presence of Zardes ready to break my heart. Some Zardes skepticism, I guess, is what I'm picking up on here. And finally, at DCavese1412 says Paul Revere racing back to the USMNT headquarters yelling, "The kids are coming," with Dest, Pamukal, Sargent, and Robinson chasing him. That seems like a solid one. I like all the imagery there, although I don't like the idea of them being put into red coats or anything like that. I'm assuming they're chasing him to show support. And if you would like to show support to Roughneck Scarves, again, the official scarf provider for U.S. Soccer, Major League Soccer, NCAA, and the USL, you can do so, and you can get 20% off any scarf in the shop with the promo code Total Soccer Show. That's all one word, all uppercase, all together. 20% off any scarf in the shop with the promo code Total Soccer Show. So thank you very much to Roughneck Scarves for sponsoring today's episode. Thank you to everyone who suggested those great custom designs. I very much appreciate it. And I very much appreciate Mr. Matt Doyle joining me to talk U.S. Soccer, U.S. Open Cup, Major League Soccer, all that good stuff. So back to me talking to Matt. We've talked a lot about Atlanta United, but you can mention them again when I ask this question. With that in mind, which teams do you think are the best coached in the league right now?
I mean, LAFC for sure. I think, I had my questions about Matias Almeida because I still think that on a very real level, the full-on man marking that San Jose does is kind of a gimmick. But it's a gimmick that works because he gets complete buy-in from his team on both sides of the ball. And as gimmicky as that defense is, their attack is electric. They have really clear ideas of what to do. So they're a really well-coached team. I still think Sporting Kansas City is a really well-coached team. I think Peter Vermees is an excellent coach. I think he's maybe shown his limits as a GM in terms of talent identification, and maybe he needs to get some of that taken off his plate. I really love what Jim Curtin's done over the last 4 years. Like, I thought he was a young coach with potential 4 years ago, and now I just think he's a good coach. And I think Luchi Gonzalez is another guy who's going to head in that direction. I'm not sure on Dome Torrent yet, because he was terrible at this time last year. And he's kind of fixed it, and they're playing good soccer now too. But I thought last year, at the start of last year, there was like a tier of like 6 or 7 coaches who were really, really good. And this year, it's not quite as clear cut.
It feels like it's pretty clear cut when it comes to the Western Conference, with LA1 already securing their spot, or LAFC, I should say, securing their spot. Is that all down to Bob Bradley, or do you feel like a huge part of it is like well, let me rephrase it this way. Like, is it crazy to you, for having covered Major League Soccer as long as you have, to watch El Tráfico and see like the personalities that are on those touchlines, but then also the players that are on the field? Because I imagine that would be really strange thinking back to like the start of the league in the early 2000s and some of the talents that were being brought in then.
Yeah, I mean, it is different in its way, but you gotta remember that the defining team of the first 4 years of MLS was that DC United team. Mm-hmm. And they were like, their stars were Marco Echeverri, who, came over as like a 26, 27-year-old. So came over right in his prime. And right after becoming, he was, I think, third in the balloting for South American Player of the Year in 95. Echeverri and Jaime Moreno, who was this really good young South American player, and then Eddie Pope, who was a star for the U.S. Olympic team.
What happened to Bolivia? I want to know what happened to Bolivia when you have those two guys and then it all kind of falls off.
It's really bizarre. And I think it feels like that's a good question for Arch Bell, or one of the guys who's really plugged in South America. But I remember seeing that DC United team who stood out because of the players that they had, and frankly how stylish their approach was. Like, they played beautiful soccer, and thinking like, this is the future of the league. This is what MLS is going to be for the next 50 years. It's going to be the League of the Americas. And I thought the future would be immediate. And it took about 20 years for the future to really arrive. So it feels like a flashback in that way, except amplified by 1,000 now because of soccer-specific stadiums, and because of the types of crowds.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because they are a team that, I watched DC in '96, and they're the team that I generally support in Major League Soccer. I'm not claiming to be a diehard or anything like that, but I do have those same memories of them being this incredibly impressive team. And then there's the year they bring in Roy Lassiter, and it almost becomes unfair in my mind. But I guess I just kind of assumed that that was probably just 13-year-old Taylor thinking they were that good and not really going back and watching them again. So maybe that's the thing I should do. Maybe we'll do that for Soccer 101, is go back and revisit that inaugural DC team and see just how good they were by modern standards.
Remember that 98 team, which is they didn't win the Supporter Shield, and they didn't win MLS Cup, and they didn't win US Open Cup. I think they finished second in all three competitions. But they played Toluca in the Champions Cup, which is the forerunner of the Champions League, beat them, and then they played Vasco da Gama, who were the Copa Libertadores champions. That Vasco team was they were easily the best team in South America. And DC played them over 2 legs in something called the Intercontinental Cup, which is no longer an official thing. It only lasted a couple of years. DC United beat them. That 98 DC United team beat them. They were really, really good. I think if you took that team and plunked them down in this year's playoffs, you would say, okay, this is a top 4 or 5 team in MLS. Now, where the difference is, they would never last for the regular season because they only had about 15, 16 players, really.
Yeah, that'll do it.
At most. Yeah, they had a roster deeper. They had 22-man roster, but most of those guys, once you got past the first 8 or 10, couldn't play in MLS today. So it's a big change.
And it's really weird to talk about a DC United team that only has maybe 15 or 16 players that seem capable and maybe can't last for an entire season, because that leads to my final question for you. Which current playoff team, or at least maybe my final question, which current playoff team do you think maybe ends up on the outside looking in, and why is it DC United?
Well, I mean, if they keep playing as they have been, there is a lot of trouble. But
Yep.
I honestly think they gave themselves enough of a cushion at the start of the season. So I think they'll back in, and I think they'll play 90 minutes, and they'll get eliminated on the road somewhere, and that'll be that for this super disappointing 2019 season. But the team that I think is actually in the most trouble is Toronto FC.
Mm-hmm.
Because, first of all, 5 of their final 7 are on the road. And I keep waiting for them to look like they look like they're bought in for the full 90 minutes. Because whenever they're bought in, and it only happens 10 or 20 minutes at a time, they're awesome. And they showed it this past weekend against Montreal. But it's almost September, and you have a home game against a rival, and there's a playoff spot on the line, and you come out at like a walking pace for the first 60 minutes. Like, what the hell is that? And if they couldn't do it in that game, why should I have any confidence in their ability to do it over the next 7 games, which they probably need to get 12 points on? So it's I don't know, man. Something is broken with Toronto FC, and I actually think that Montreal, because Montreal have 5 of their final 6 at home, I think Montreal is going to be able to jump over them and get that last playoff spot in the East.
And which team that maybe has had an unsuccessful season do you think is most likely to successfully overhaul, or who do you think has the kind of inclination to change it up, bring in some new personnel when it comes to the front office to make those changes down the road?
Oof. It's a big question, because there are a lot of teams who need a lot of work. And honestly, most of them have already started doing it. Mm-hmm. We've seen it in Cincinnati. We've seen Columbus now start to turn over their roster a little bit, bring in a good young DP in Diaz. And, we've seen Houston, Colorado make coaching changes. Vancouver made a big front office change. The one to keep an eye on in terms of players, to me, is Sporting.
Okay.
Because, I think Vermees is a really good coach. I think he made the wrong choice in terms of some of his GM stuff. And they're going to have the opportunity to rebuild a chunk of that roster this offseason, get some young legs in there, maybe get a real starting caliber center forward in there, and they could bounce back in a hurry in 2020.
All right. Well, if they do, I'm sure you'll be here to, or hopefully you'll be here to talk to us about it. But Matt, I really appreciate it. I know this is your.
Wait, no, I got a question. Question for you now.
Oh boy. Okay.
Because after last night's U.S. Open Cup championship, the story on Twitter from a lot of folks, fans, journalists, and ever, was that they were discounting Atlanta's Campeones Cup win against Club America. And I understand why. This is the second year of it. It was kind of just, I don't want to say arbitrarily, but it sort of came out of the blue a year ago, and nobody's sure exactly how significant it is. Mm-hmm. And to you, as someone who has seen stuff like the Intercontinental Cup, which we mentioned before, has seen that come into play, as someone who has seen CONCACAF Champions League go from kind of what is this, to, oh my God, we have to win this, and has seen other, let's say, less prestigious tournaments mm-hmm. come and go. Where does that Campeones Cup rank for you in terms of Atlanta United's accomplishments, or should, let's say, LAFC beat Tigres next year? Where would it rank for that?
For Atlanta, I would put it 5th on the list right now.
Mm-hmm.
I would have winning MLS Cup being a huge one. I really do think like U.S. Open Cup is in there. I think making the playoffs and looking as exciting as they did right away is up there. And then I think whether or not you want to call it like wildly successful, I think going from Tata to Frank de Boer is a major accomplishment. So I feel like all of those are maybe ahead of it, which I think is a way of answering your question to say that like right now, I don't think of that competition as that big of a deal. It's exciting to see them win, but I think it's because, to speak very honestly, I get a little bit frustrated by how much branded sponsored stuff there is, and sometimes it feels like the Intercontinental Cup, for example, is not one that you let off with by being like the Intercontinental Cup presented by AT&T. And I feel like the more stuff there is like that, whether rightly or wrongly, the more stuff that exists like that, the more I'm like, does this matter, or is this just another opportunity to make a little bit of money? And I think, to your initial point, if this keeps going and it keeps being an exciting thing that people do start to kind of buy into and feel like it's an important competition and Mexican teams are caring about it, then I think I buy into it a little bit more. But when it feels more like a kind of marketing gimmick first and then an opportunity to compete second, at least that's how it feels to me, that's where I'm less excited about it.
So it's kind of at the Community Shield level or like UEFA Super Cup level.
Probably UEFA Super Cup. Because I used to be excited about the Community Shield only because I was a Manchester United fan, and it was like, hey, they're doing stuff, and maybe it'll count, and then the manager can say they won 4 trophies or whatever. But I think it's probably Super Cup in that it's like a thing that I know people care about and gets coverage, but I still just have a hard time being like, okay, but what is it now? Like, okay, so it's the 2 best teams, but like, do either of them care? And like, are they starting their starters? Like, it's that sort of level for me. Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison.
All right, good to know.
Have I upset you? Have I personally offended you now?
No. That clarifies it for me a little bit. And like, I kind of look at it the same way. And I was super cynical about both the Campeones Cup and the Leagues Cup when both were announced, and then, covering them and everything. But in the process of covering, like seeing how much the Mexican teams cared, that did it for me, because the thing to remember is that for Mexican teams, for Liga MX teams, it's an embarrassment to lose to an MLS team. So they come out there and they play with, some aguante, and they tend to play their best 11s, and they tend to be really, really angry when they lose. And that ended up hooking me really fast. And I don't think it's like, I don't compare winning Campeones Cup to Open Cup, MLS Cup, or the Supporter Shield, which I still think is the best trophy to win. And certainly not to CONCACAF Champions League win, or if a MLS team ever wins that. But I found it to be good, intense soccer, and had a lot of fun with it. So,
that actually helps, because I think it's whenever it feels like a maybe like leaning towards a gimmick, and then the players are sort of like, oh, you're not going into challenges. Like, oh, you guys aren't really trying that hard. You pulled out of that one. That should have been a yellow card, but the ref didn't want to give it. That's when I sort of start to lose interest. But if it is the case that they're going into challenges and really want to win and don't like each other, then I can buy in, Doyle. I think you've sold a little bit. But I have one follow-up question to something you said. Do Liga MX teams see it as an embarrassment to lose to MLS teams because of the way the league is perceived in Mexico, or is it because losing to any American team or North American team is like seen as a failure?
I think it's both.
Interesting.
I think the perception is getting better, but still, they've won all 13 CONCACAF Champions Leagues. So like
there's that.
There's still a perception, which is probably justifiable, that MLS is the little brother in the relationship. So I think it's that. And then inherent to that is the panic when you actually do lose. Like, oh my God, we're losing our edge. We're losing our ability to be the dominant team in the relationship. And we saw that, or in the rivalry, and we saw that in the 2000s with the U.S. versus Mexico on the national team level.
All right. Well, I appreciate you helping me understand all these things, Doyle. Thank you. And for enlightening me on things like how good Corey Baird is at the Soccers. So thank you for that.
No problem, my friend. It's good to chat with you.
Yeah, good to chat with you. Thank you for flipping the tables. The only other person who does that is Alexi Lalas. He will always flip it and start asking us questions. And I guess Bobby does that too. I'm sure that will come as no surprise to you that Bobby Warshaw pauses to ask questions.
Neither of those is a surprise to me.
But I'll add you to that list now so you can enjoy that or not. I leave it to you. But Doyle, thank you very much. Obviously, MLS Soccer is where people can find you. And your Twitter avatar Twitter name one more time is?
Matt Doyle 76.
There we go. All right, Doyle. Well, thank you very, very much. I will let you get back to, I'm assuming, writing many, many things about the U.S. national team in Major League Soccer. But thank you again.
All right. You got it, bud.